Hey everybody, this is Dr. Maples. So we're going to get started on using RStudio today. Now I do want to make a quick point about how we're going to do this lecture. I experimented with some different ways to do this where I try to go back and forth between using R versus using the PowerPoint and having screenshots. And the screenshot option really seemed to work best by far. Trying to go back and forth between those was just a nightmare. So what I'm going to do is go through this lecture and subsequent lectures using screenshots of R. But I want to point out that you can open this PowerPoint file, which is on Blackboard. You can open the YouTube video to watch us going through this. And I've included the information so you can cut and paste things and actually use RStudio while we're doing this. So you can do the very same things that we're seeing. That way, when we get to the end of the lecture series and we get to play with some of these ideas in discussion, you'll be able to do this on your own. But for now, let's start with the most important thing, and that's learning to open RStudio. So depending on if you're using a Mac, PC, Linux, you know where to go find a program to open it. If you're using Windows, for example, the lower left corner is usually where you can hit your start bar. Go in there and find RStudio. Now remember, we have R downloaded and we have RStudio. We want to use RStudio. RStudio is actually going to go into your computer and use the R files that we downloaded as well, but we're just using RStudio. One final note, if you're using the Keith Lab computers, they only have R on them. So you won't see some of the extra boxes that we'll have available, but you can still do all of the same things that we'll talk about here. Likewise, I'll talk to the Computer Lab people to see if I can get R squared added to there. And if I do, I'll put an update on the file to let you know in the Blackboard course. So open RStudio. And then what you're going to do is when you open this, it's just like any other document that you might open. Like if you're opening a Word document in there, I want to go to the upper left corner and click on File in RStudio, click on Open File, and then find the R data that you downloaded from Blackboard. Remember, I told you to download it to your desktop, which is a really easy place to find it. So you can find that file, and I want you to go ahead and open it. And what's going to happen is 99% of the time, it's going to say that it wants you to verify that you want to open this into your environment. You do. This is actually just R saying, hey, this is a whole workspace I'm opening, and I want to make sure that this is what you wanted me to do. And we do. It's just basically a way to make sure that if you had a file open, that now you know you're opening a new workspace and it could change that one. When you open it, it's going to look something like this. It can sometimes look a little different. For some reason, some computers can have the screen slightly different size and so forth, but this will more or less be what you're going to be looking at. Now, let me talk about some of the different things that we are seeing here. First off, on the left side, where you see the word load and then the Maples desktop, that's where I loaded the data set. Yours will be slightly different based on where you saved your file. But this is where we're going to enter in commands to tell R to do stuff with that data file. Now, on top of that, because we use RStudio, you'll see on the right side where we actually can see the data set. It says final grade prediction, 240 observations, 14 variables, and so forth. We'll actually be able to click on some things up there and look at the data. Now, if you're just using R, you wouldn't have that. In fact, you would have to open that in a whole separate window going through the point and click boxes above. One other thing too is down in the lower right corner is a section where we're actually able to do something where we download more information. Now, we're not going to use that, but I want to tell you a little bit about it. This R is very cool, and RStudio is very cool in that it's open source. That means that computer programmers out there occasionally create new programs called packages that you can download that give you even more tools that you can do in R. We're not going to need that right now, so you can actually minimize this particular window. If you look on the far right side, there's a small window, big window symbol. You can actually click the small window and make this one go away, and it'll give you a bigger data set window. But this will give you information by using RStudio that lets you see this stuff on multiple screens rather than with R where you had to open it on multiple screens and it gets really confusing. This will make your life a little more efficient. Let's learn more about that data set. So first off, what I want you to do is in the upper kind of right area where we have our data set, I want you to click on that blue circle. I've circled the picture of it here on my PowerPoint picture, but you can click that and it's going to show us more information about our variables. Now, I want to talk to you about what you're looking at here. So do you see where it says the word score, absences, job status, and more? It's before a colon. That's actually the name of the variable that we're looking at. So that first variable is score. It's the student's final exam score. And it also lists the word int to let you know it's basically a continuous piece of data. I think the term is integer, if I remember correctly in the coding world. But it's continuous data. It's a real number. Good thing is all of these are real numbers that we can use for our purposes. So you can see it also lists the first couple of scores that it had in that little section. So it has some 64s and some 65s, and then ... means that there's a whole bunch of other data out there. It's just showing the first couple. Likewise, we have a variable on absences. Looks like it was sitting at the top because it shows a whole bunch of people with 7 absences. Job status, it shows that it's an integer and it's got a bunch of 1s. Well, this is actually an example of what we call a dichotomous dummy variable. Remember, we've talked about this a couple of times. Dichotomous dummy variable is where we're measuring the presence of a category and the absence of a category. If they have a job, then they get a 1. If they don't have a job, they get a 0. Likewise, I've got academic groups in there. I happen to know that 1 means a fresh person, 2 means a sophomore, 3 means a junior, 4 means a senior. We have Red Bull, which is the number of Red Bulls they drink in the 24 hours before their final. Same for coffee. Hours studied is the number of hours they studied in the 24 hours before the final. Sleep is if they get sufficient sleep, and so forth. It goes all the way down to 8 healthy, which is the last variable. 8 healthy means that they generally eat well during finals week. Now, all that stuff below there is just extra information. There's a whole bunch of extra information that we don't need, like labels and things like that. And that's just not going to matter to us. So we only have those first 14 lines are our variables. Now, the fun thing is you can actually see the data set kind of like an Excel file as well. I've circled a little calendar button, which is kind of what it looks like to me, but I guess it's also like a similar like Excel file. But you can click that on that right side to actually see your data set. You can go through and sort things, take a look at it, and kind of get more familiar with it. Now, there's one more piece of information that I want to let you know about here too, is that when you're looking at your data, we have some other information that we should probably know about. So first off, this is if you clicked on the screen here where click the calendar button to see your actual data set, click on that. And that's going to open up this screen for you. Now, it may be a screen that's minimized, so if you don't see it right away, see if you need to maximize it so you can see it. But this gives you a screen where it's got some information that we need to talk about. So the first row that you see there is the case or the respondent. That means that's the file. So the first one was respondent 1, the second one was respondent 2. Later in the semester, we're going to use a county data set. So the first one is the first county, the second one is the second county, and so forth. Now, next we have variable names listed, kind of like you would in an Excel file. So I've put a square around the absences. Absences is one of our variables, as is job status, a CAD group, Red Bull, coffee, hours studied, sleep, and more. Variable scores, these are the measures that we have inside of those. So, for example, if you were a person who had a job and you took this survey, let's say that you were respondent 1 and you had a job, then when you took our little survey, you gave us a yes, I have a job, and so we coded that as a 1. So you see where the person with the number 1, the first case, number 1 case, they had a score of 64 on the final exam, and their absences, they had 7 of them, and their job status was a 1 because they told us they had a job. Likewise, too, these other things are scores that we can interpret. For example, a CAD group, I happen to know that a 3 meant that they were a junior. Likewise, a Red Bull, that means a 0 means that they didn't drink any Red Bull in the 24 hours before the final. And same thing for the coffee, too. They had 0 coffees in the 24 hours beforehand. Hours study, they studied for 2 hours in the 24 hours before the exam. 0 means they don't get enough sleep on average, and so forth. These are all different variables. Now, you may be asking yourself, how do I know so much about this data set? Well, I was the person who have managed this data set, so I know everything there is to know about it. You, however, are seeing it for the first time. So this is where I want to add one extra piece of information, and that's using a code book. We've talked about code books when we talked about surveys before, but now we get to actually see what a code book does. If you look on Blackboard, I've also placed a code book that tells you what all the variables in this data set are. You can download that, and so you'll be able to learn these. Codebooks are part of developing surveys. This is how we let ourselves know and other people know what variables we've made, what we mean by that variable, and perhaps most importantly, how we coded that variable. What does a 1 mean in job status? Well, a 1 means that they had a job. A 0 meant that they didn't. Nearly all the data sets that you're ever going to use will have this information. Often when you download it as a package, it'll have that information, but I wanted to make things easy so you could just go back and get this information later rather than talking about downloading and zipping files. One other thing I want to point about R is that the bulk of actual R data sets that you download will have this information built into the R data set. This is kind of a newer thing that is available, but for you, I wanted to keep things simple. So know that future R data sets you might use could have that information already in there. Ones that we use in our class, I'm just going to keep it simple and have that information as a downloadable Word document. That's all we're going to do today. We've gone through the process of opening RStudio. We've gone through the process of opening our first data set. And now we're looking through some of the variables just to learn kind of how RStudio works. Now what we're going to do in our next lecture is get into actually analyzing some of this data and make sense of what it means. Do go into our Blackboard course under course documents where you found our data set and go ahead and download this code book as well. And look around the data set. Get familiar with it. You can't break this data set. In fact, if you accidentally screw something up, just close the program and start it over again and you'll be good to go. But look through this data set and get familiar with what you see happening. So that's what we'll finish for here. In our next one, we're going to start doing some basic analytics. I'll see you in the next lecture. Let me know if you need any help. Otherwise, take care.